My guest this hour is Michelle Easton. She is the president and founder of the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women and the author of a new book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. Here, we talk in this interview about why you would want to raise a conservative daughter and why she felt the need to explain the best way to do so. Here is the first segment of our interview. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have a new book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. And I guess I want to start by asking you why you felt it was important to write the book.
Well, I've been here. I founded and I've been president of the Center for Conservative Women for 28 years. And I've noticed there's some things that happen in the lives of many of these young women who turn out to be great young conservative leaders. And many conservative families think, well, we're conservative. We take her to church. She's going to turn out conservative. It's just not that way anymore. There's too many other influences on young women. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And mom and dad are totally shocked. So I thought I would write what I've learned over 28 years about how it is that some of these young women turn out to be such great conservatives.
Right. And kind of a manual on how you can help talk to your daughter and keep her on the right track, right?
That's right. That's right. And talking is what's so essential because moms and dads are so busy. Most of them are working. You have to make the time to talk. Meal times is a great time. If you can sit at dinner almost every night and you can talk with your children, your daughter about important things, then you're going to really be ahead of the game. You got to talk, turn off the phone, close up the laptop. And it's hard. People are busy. They got busy jobs, but you have to do that with your daughter. So let's talk about the problem first, why they're having a hard time. I talk a lot on my show about the culture, so I know that is part of it. We know that they're being inundated with stuff nowadays that children weren't exposed to, definitely not as early as they are now. But you write a little bit about a problem from a conservative standpoint that people have where they think that they're doing the right thing and they're instilling the proper values and laying the foundation, and then that their child reaches that college age and they start to reject everything that they were taught. Now, we know that this is not necessarily new, and then many people, if they have the foundation, they find their way back. Mm-hmm. It definitely happens a lot more now than it used to. So what's different now that these kids get in their 20s and they just totally reject everything that they were taught? That's right. And most parents are doing the very best they can. I know that. And I'm not trying to criticize any parent, especially if the girl turns out to be, something they're not happy with. I'm sure they tried. But what's different today is that there's this toxic social media. Kids are on their phones, on the social media all the time. There's radical indoctrination in many of the schools. You know that. Everything from critical race theory and values for families and sexuality. It's very easy for young people. It's very seductive the way they do it. And it used to be you'd grow up conservative almost by osmosis, because of your family. It's just the cultural climate today is just too strong on many kids. And so conservative beliefs have to be taught, nurtured, and cultivated throughout a girl's upbringing, starting young. When you think about it as a parent, what could be a more important thing to spend your time on than shaping your girl to be a traditional, God-fearing, conservative woman, taking some extra time to do it, watching very carefully who she's associating with, what she's watching online, who she's talking to, just taking more time at school, at social media, at Hollywood, it's TV. It's just so seductive that sometimes parents don't even realize their kids are turning. And the truth is, Charles, it's even before college in some cases. It's in high school.
Yeah, right.
It's tough being a parent today.
Right. Now, we'll get to some of the particulars from the book, but I want to say, like the title says, and you've mentioned, what you're navigating with your girls. But some people may not understand. So explain to me, why your daughter? Why not your son? Why not child? It doesn't say how to raise a conservative. It's how to raise a conservative daughter. So explain why it's particularly focused on parents and their daughters.
Right. First, I'll say a lot of the advice in here and suggestions could be for sons as well, but there are some girly angles to it. Mm-hmm. The Center for Conservative Women is one of the rare conservative groups in America that only focuses on young women and older women as role models. Mm-hmm. There's so many great guys that we'd like to bring in and have them speak and talk to girls, but we don't, because there's plenty of other groups that do that. We work on young women in high school, college, and post-college to help those who lead our way or learn more about our conservative ideas to become leaders, to become effective, speaking out on issues. Pick their issue, pick how they want to do it. Maybe they want to write letters. Maybe they want to, when they're in college, bring in conservative women speakers. But it's just what we do at the Center for Conservative Women. We only work with girls and with conservative women. I have 3 sons, so somebody should write this book for sons, or as I said, a lot of the advice would apply for sons as well. But that's not what we do here. We don't do young men, we do young women, and that's why I wrote How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. And, there are some differences. I've got a chapter on that, how women's differences are her strengths, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. Right. But we only do women at the Center for Conservative Women. Not that we don't like men. We love men. We love our sons, our fathers, and all that. We do women. We do girls. So how to raise a conservative daughter.
So part of that is, like you say, because there's other organizations out there that do that. So you like many organizations and groups and businesses, for that matter, that find their niche and that's what they focus on. Mm-hmm. But to just put a finer point on it, there has to be something that you think that's missing or that's needed in the culture generally that would help parents raise the kids, but that you saw that particularly affected daughters, that led you to say that this message it will either resonate more with girls or is needed at has a greater need for girls than it is for boys.
Right. Yeah, well, it's true. In addition to the left-wing liberal dominance in schools and the media and the culture, women also have feminists, radical feminists, who began back in the 60s and are very dominant in many ways. They don't speak up so much as feminists anymore, but it's a philosophy, that women are victims, that, most men are patriarchal and dominant. One of their favorite T-shirts was, "A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle." The radical feminist leaders, not every woman who calls herself a feminist, but the radical feminist leaders today are anti-male, anti-faith, anti-American, many of them. So it's an additional element that girls have that boys don't have as much. It's the radical feminist influence in all parts of the culture. And, the original feminists, or suffragettes we call them, talked about equal treatment under the law for women. Laws regarding marriage and property and all that would be equal. And everybody was for that. And then the word meant, strong, courageous, smart women. Well, look at my mom. I mean, that was her. She wasn't a feminist, but she worked hard, and it was a different kind of generation. But at some point, probably around the anti-Vietnam War, the feminists got a lot more radical, and their focus was on, abortion, on, now they call it LGBTQT. It used to be just lesbianism, and they became more radical. They're not just the suffragettes anymore. It's not about equal treatment for men and women. It's about a radical philosophy that doesn't like you fellas much.
Well, this show is going to be the atheist and liberal listener's nightmare. After Christian conservative Claston Bernard and now Michelle Easton, I would only say that I am open to all voices, and this should really motivate you to send me some thinkers who feel the opposite to interview them, because I have no problem with having them on. They tend to have a problem coming on. Coming up, More with Michelle Easton, author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
She's gone.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Michelle Easton, president and founder of the Claire Booth Lewis Center for Conservative Women and author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. And in this segment, I asked her to talk a little bit about her dozen years with the Department of Education and what she sees as a problem from the federal standpoint of education and what she saw when she was there.
You have over a dozen years of experience working prior to your organization, and a lot of that being with the Department of Education. So can you talk a little bit about what you saw while you were there and now having that experience, looking at now what's happening in education, how it's different and how it gets worse?
I had just finished law school. It was 1980. I put myself through at night. I had nobody to pay my way. And President Reagan was elected. What to do? It wasn't a hard choice for me. I wanted to work for President Reagan. So I did. 8 years with President Reagan. Now, he promised to abolish the Federal Department of Education because he said, and I agree with him so much, education should be first a parental decision, then a local, a little bit of state, but for the most part, the federal government shouldn't be involved in it all. I mean, that department is a huge, massive interference. It does a little bit of money out there to localities and makes huge number of decisions. So I went there for President Reagan after he hired me to abolish it. And we failed at that. It just never got out of committee. And so I stayed the whole 8 years of President Reagan. I left department. I came back after when Secretary Bennett came in. I had some great jobs. One of them was the Missing Children's Program. You know those pictures on the milk cartons? I was the first director of the Missing Children's Program, and President Reagan didn't get all the credit he should have for that. So I was the first director. That was great. I came back to the department under Bennett, and then when the first President Bush was elected, he asked me to stay and run this little department there, the Office of Private Education. So I had 12 years there. What I see looking back, 12 years as a Fed, is everything conservatives think about the federal government being big and too expensive and wasteful. It's 10 times worth, Charles. And that's not to say there aren't good people. I had good friends, but the federal government is just out of control. And now with President Biden and all this trillions of dollars of spending, it's totally out of control. So after that is when I came out. And again, do I practice law? No, I love the policy. And a place where we were a little bit weak as conservatives was in celebrating our conservative women. And I thought, I'm going to form a group that works with young women, especially in college, and gives them great conservative role models. And, the left has been doing this for years with these women's studies programs and their feminist groups. We were weak on that. Not that we didn't have great women. We didn't celebrate them. We didn't use them as role models. So that's why I started the Institute 28 years ago. And it seemed like there were a lot of people who thought it was a good idea. You know, all of our funding is from private individuals. We never take any government money. It's a good idea to have great role models for young women and to train them up to be good, outspoken, but gracious lady, conservative leaders.
Your education experience is interesting because, I mean, like you said, you failed trying to go and end the department, but I mean, we could talk about the cultural shifts and all that kind of stuff, but one thing specifically being in it, working at the federal level in the education department, trying to guide and direct education at large for the whole country, which is a complicated thing to do. So even though you weren't able to get rid of it and abolish that department, one of the bigger problems we have in education today is the goal of that department is totally different now, right? Everything moves from the top. So when you had Reagan trying to get rid of the department, whether you agree with it or not, obviously his approach is going to be different. Since he doesn't think the department should be there anyway, it's going to be a light touch approach as opposed to now where you have the department basically creating social and other agendas and doing things, whether, it's not a political thing in a sense of, left, right. It's more, it could be. But my point is that you have these people running an organization that's supposed to be focused on education, and they're bringing all these things in that have nothing to do with education, and they're reining it down on the state and local level. So, of course, it's going to dramatically shift what the education department is doing, right? Is that what you see happening right now in education?
Yeah, I mean, there's more and more interference in what parents and local jurisdictions would like to do. Everything from, critical race theory to, the evils of capitalism and how wonderful socialism is. And they call it history, but the anti-American 1619 project is just totally wrong, filled with false information and deprives children of information they need. In fact, it happens on the state level as well. One of the other jobs I had was I was president of the Virginia Board of Education under Governor George Allen, a great conservative. And one of the things we did is we shifted from social studies to history. Social studies is about children learning to socialize and how the world socializes and all that. History is what happened, when, why, and what can we learn from it. Well, this battle continues. We did shift it from social studies to history, the curriculum in Virginia, but they've shifted it back. So we're back to social studies. History is so important. Those who fail to learn from history are bound to repeat it, as was said. Mm-hmm. So the federal government has no business in education, as Ronald Reagan said, and they don't give that much money, but they have tremendous interference in things that are not really education. They're political philosophies, they're policies of the left, and it's not what most parents want their children to learn in school. Reading, writing, arithmetic, science, a few other things. Get the kids so they can leave school and be competent in a job or go on to more school, whatever. That's not the goal anymore. It's social goals. It's fooling with kids' minds, and that's wrong.
Well, I just wanted to hit on that because I thought that was an interesting background to talk about. But to the book, you have some pretty interesting and direct points that you lay out to explain how you can, as you say, raise a conservative daughter. And one of the things that you mentioned, you talk about how religious faith and human freedom are inextricably linked. So talk a bit about the importance of faith in creating and raising a conservative daughter.
Right. Well, it's so key for a young woman to understand that, the source of her self-worth is God. It's not government. The liberal point of view is very, very different. Knowing that she's uniquely made and unconditionally loved by God will be the cornerstone of her conservatism. Uncle Sam, the government, can never substitute for a good father and a graceful mother, much less for God. But so much of what is conveyed to young women suggests that government is the answer to any challenges they have. Affirmative action, government-funded healthcare, housing, taxpayer-funded free stuff. That's what gives you your self-worth as a young woman. Dependency on government fuels the socialist and leftist beliefs. And in truth, government is the God of these people. And young women who have faith, who understand that God loves them, that are rights that are in the Constitution, they don't come from government, they come from God. And it's government's job to protect them. If you read the founding documents, that's what they say. So faith is a critical part. I mean, it's my first chapter in here because it really is the cornerstone for all that comes later. Now, some people say, you mean you're saying if you're not a believer, you can't be a conservative? Well, you can, but it's tough. It's very tough. I think, the greatest gift you can give your daughter is the knowledge that she's uniquely made and unconditionally loved by God. And this is how she gets self-worth and self-esteem. And so I talk a lot in here about even mom and dad, if you are not real faith focused, take her to church. Expose her to faith. It's really key to understand this connection between freedom and faith. It's really the core of conservatism. Religious faith and human freedom are linked. I mean, did you ever wonder why these totalitarian governments, why do they impose atheism on their people? Why do they do that? Because they want government to be the God that people look to. And the people who believe in an eternal afterlife, they're dangerous to totalitarian and tyrannical governments because they're bold and courageous. They're not afraid to sacrifice themselves for causes bigger than themselves. So, modern socialism fosters a government dependency that to a lot of them, it's the God. Your self-worth comes from what the government gives you. No. Your self-worth comes from God.
Coming up, more with Michelle Easton, author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Michelle Easton, author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. And in the last segment, she was bringing some light to what she saw as part of the Department of Education. So that being such an important topic for me, we continue here talking about what some of the problems are and the subtle ways that teachers and administrators are hurting kids in their efforts to create a more inclusive learning environment.
Another thing that's important, because you got to understand that, like you mentioned, there'll be some people who bristle at that and think that you're telling people to force religion on their kids, or you're trying to think that there's a governmental, that the government should be a religious government. And that's not the case. But what I think, and what I have a lot of conversations about context and trying to get people to understand, is that there is no true morals or morality that comes from evolution or atheism or anything like that. Because if it's all subjective, then there are no definitive facts and nothing that we can point to and say this is what it is. So you're right that the rights don't come from the government. Their job is just to protect the rights we already have. And you make a good point about the church thing. What's interesting is there are now, as this thing spirals out of control, a growing number of center-left people and even atheists writing that, they haven't reached that level of belief, but they think that people need to go to church because there's something, they can't put their finger on it because they don't have the faith, but there's something in religion and something in that belief that helps guide people. And we need it, whether it's true or not, is their argument. So you don't even have to, like you said, be a believer. There's a foundation to it that's important. But another thing you mentioned that's important, you talked about self-worth. And you write about this, and I think this is key, and I talk about this a lot. Can you talk about the difference between self-worth and self-esteem, right? Mm-hmm. Because right now, the push is focused more toward self-esteem, the self-esteem movement, rather than self-worth. So talk about that a little bit.
That's right. I mean, to just reiterate what you said, you don't have to be the most devout person to experience the benefits of worship. And it's a huge addition to a girl's life. But, self-worth is a much deeper conservative concept that places the value of the individual outside of the reach of cultural forces and government. But it's the left that tries to undermine this robust conception of self-worth by replacing it with self-esteem. And they're really, really quite different. Self-esteem makes fragile people look to others for validation. According to the left, and my sister was a teacher, and I write a little bit about it, she was told the children's self-esteem is the most important thing that she can give her children. And she was told she had to say multiple times during the day how awesome they were. And she said, sometimes they weren't, but they were required to do this. And then when they did do something awesome, it becomes a meaningless word. Self-esteem can be positive, but praising children for fear of hurting their feelings is a poor substitute for nurturing their true innate value as children of a loving God. And that's self-worth versus self-esteem.
Right. And another problem that I think they have, you talk about in the book about, having people have respect for adults. And one thing you said, someone said, like, should you say yes, ma'am, yes, sir? You say, that's kind of where you're from. If you're in the South, they probably do. You don't have to do it. But you definitely should respect adults and respect and honor your parents. You don't have to like them. So even if you have bad parents, there's a level of respect. And I want to tell you a story and see what you think of this. Now, I see a lot of problems that I see in education, and most people agree with them. But, everybody knows the book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff. Well, I was the opposite guy. As somebody with a big faith in God, I thought God would take care of the big things. I only sweat the small things. So I would bristle if I'm getting off the elevator and somebody tries to walk on while I'm trying to get on, I might get mad about that for like 45 seconds. But if something bad, I lose my job, I'm just like, oh, I just got to do this because, it's out of my control. Why freak out about it? So, I mention this because a lot of people think, what's the big deal of this? But I have a young one. So my son went to school the first time. And he comes back talking about his teachers. And I just kind of didn't like it. Something didn't sit with me well. And they're like, what do you mean? So I went to school and everybody knew you had Mrs. Williams or Miss Jones or Mr. Johnson. And they call all their teachers by their first name. And it's like Miss Ashley and Miss Katie. And I was like, no, that does not, it's bringing them down to the same level. And in the long term, it doesn't foster that separation that we need. And so when you talked about that in your book, that's what I thought about. And that's what they're doing now. What do you think about that? I don't even know if you know that some schools do that. What do you think about, 5, 6, 7-year-olds going around talking about their teachers, Katie and Lisa, instead of using their last name?
I think it's real hard for teachers to establish the respect they need when they're Katie and Lisa. Mm-hmm. Teachers are the authority in the classroom. Now, I will say it's not like when I went to school. You're younger, but when I went to school, almost all parents shared the values of the teachers. Now you got some teachers in there with different agendas, and you've been hearing about that right here in Loudoun County, Virginia, where the parents have erupted over some of the stuff they're trying to teach the kids and, have the little boys in the bathroom with the little girls and all that. So it's not quite like it used to be. But at the same time, I think teaching your children to respect authority, the authority of teachers, is not really helped when you're calling them by their first name.
Coming up, more with Michelle Easton, author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Michelle Easton, author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. And in this segment, we finish our conversation about education and move on to other parts of her book. She talks about the importance of family in raising a child, and how, in her words, heroic single mothers are, and the importance of work.
And another quick one that just popped in my head, the other one I had a problem with. So, there's this whole gender thing, right, that's being pushed in schools. So now the teachers are kind of getting coaxed not to say boys and girls and that kind of thing, which is fine. They're not changing other things. But what I found that is subtle, but it makes a difference. So the teachers weren't saying boys and girls. What they would say is they would say friends. Yeah. And like me, that also bothered me because it's like, again, bringing it down to the same level. So they'd be like, okay, friends, this is what we're going to do. I'm like, they're not your friends. You are the authority figure in that room. And if you keep calling them friends, so then you come to me mad when you tell him to do something. He's like, I don't feel like doing it. It's like, well, he won't listen. Why should he listen to you? You have no authority. And they don't see how those two things are in conflict.
You're absolutely right. There are customs and conventions that are more likely to have the children behaving in a way that is more conducive to learning, because that's what they're there for, to learn.
Right. And then another thing you talk about is history, the importance of learning actual history, factual. And I think that's so important. And the problem is it could have been taught better, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But what they're doing now is overcorrected. So they're like, well, we just want to either make stuff up or add stuff without context, or they act like the whole day, they act like school is just history, right? They teach more Black history, teach more this history. So basically you want to just go to school all day and just teach history. So there'll be no math and no science. It's just going to be history all day. It's insane. You cannot teach everything in history, right? So when everybody gets to choose what their history they want to teach, you lose something. And how they teach it. They want to teach America's bad outside of teaching America's flaw. And then they want to blame, paint us conservatives as you just don't want to teach history. You don't want to teach what America did bad. No, I love teaching what America did bad. I want to teach it in context. What you want to do is say America is bad. I want to say America did bad. And then I want to say America did bad, and you want to say America's bad and never point out the slavery in Latin America or, who owned the slave ships or what happened in China or all that kind of stuff. So if you want to teach history, let's go. We can teach history, but it needs to be what human nature has done over the course of centuries, not just what America did in its short life.
That's right. And it needs to be taught fully and accurately. This 1619 project that the left likes so much argues that the American Revolution was fought in defense of slavery. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, there was a king. He was taxing people. I mean, it was not the major reason for the American Revolution. It's grossly inaccurate, but it's taught in schools all over now, and they don't learn real facts and real history. I'm fine with people having different points of view. That's fine. But they don't teach anything they don't agree with. And when you get to college, it's even worse. The kids speak up. They get their grade marked down. You got a Marxist professor. Most of them don't want to hear about the wonders of freedom and capitalism. It's all only their point of view. So that's not education to me. That's indoctrination. And when they start doing it with the littlest kids, and then it goes all the way through high school and all the way through college, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. I think a lot of parents during this horrible COVID shutdowns that we had were home. They were watching their kids on, getting their computer lessons, and they were saying, oh, my goodness, this is what they're learning? Right. It was a wake-up for an awful lot of parents, I think. And now you got teachers and what I'm reading today in the paper, they still don't want to go back to school until every child is vaccinated.
Right. The interesting thing, real quick, about the 1619 project, to the Revolutionary War point, the fallacy that they point out that's the reason why it was fought. The way to debunk it is real simple. So we fought the American Revolution because we wanted to keep our slaves and they wanted us to not have slaves. But slavery didn't end in the UK until, 60 years later. So they could be in the UK and still have slaves. So that's not
it's just thing. False.
Yeah,
it's an outrage for our kids.
We can't get to the whole book, but they should take out the book. You talk about other things like valuing life. You talk about managing money and serving others. So you talk about, basically you talk about making a better person in every facet of life, and how you do that. If nothing else, nothing's a guarantee, but would probably increase the chances that your foundation that you created will hold.
That's right. And also I talk about family. And, I'm one who will always say, I raised 3 sons. I had a husband and my mom and dad across the street. These women who raised sons alone, children alone, they are heroic. It's not ideal. It's better to have a mom and a dad and family around. So I don't say it to ping on them. I don't know how they do it, some of these single mothers. But the truth is that 4 hands raising a daughter and 4 eyes are better than 2. And if you can do it, if you can keep it together, it's better for your family, a strong, close family. And if you don't have a father around or a mother around, well, bring in others, bring in substitutes, bring in grandma. If you're raising your daughter alone, you can use this approach by building strong, supporting relationships with others. Family is so key to these young conservative women who turn out so well. I've worked with thousands of them, Charles, over the years. That's why I wrote this book. I wanted to share what it is that I see. The other big thing that I see, and I think you mentioned this, is working. The most consistent trait I've found in these leadership type conservative young women is that once they're old enough, they get jobs. I got a job at 16. Teaches you all kinds of things, responsibility, the value of work.
Coming up, my final segment with Michelle Easton, founder and president of the Center for Conservative Women and author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. We've reached the final segment of my interview with Michelle Easton, founder and president of the Claire Booth Lewis Center for Conservative Women, and author of How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. Here is the final segment of that interview.
This notion that, oh, my little princess, I don't want her to have to work. No, have her get a job, or even if she volunteers, that's a job of sorts. It's central to the American dream and understanding economics, that first paycheck when they take all those taxes out, and to her personal development, to learn how to work with other people, learn how to work with people different from her, to learn that money is tied to work.
Yes, definitely. Another thing I want to say is that I asked you early on, like the book is How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. Why not son? Why not kid? Because it works for everybody. Well, another way I can spin that is to take out a different word. Why not how to raise a daughter? So why were you focused on a conservative daughter?
Because it's changed so much. Because it used to be, you got a conservative mom and dad, you go to church sometimes, your girl's probably going to be conservative. It's not that way anymore. It's not a magic thing. It takes a lot more hard work. You've got to think about it. You got to think about when your little ones are small. You got to talk. You got to do the service. You got to do the church. You got to do the work. You got to teach them about the rights, about the exceptionalism in the country. You're not going to get it when they're teaching the 1619 part. You're not going to learn, these core, the Declaration of Independence and what really, how key God was to our founding fathers. The kids aren't going to learn in school anymore. That's what's different now.
Tell the people about the Claire Booth Luce Center so they can learn more about it, where they can find it, what your purpose is, and how they can come out and volunteer or help if they choose to feel inclined to do so.
Right. Well, I'm happy to. We work with young women, mostly in college, some in high school, who want to become better leaders to promote conservative ideas. Right now, we have 7 interns from schools all over the country. We did a speaking seminar. Stand at the podium. Wherever you are in your ability, you can get better. We've done history. We had a common law seminar, explaining how key God is to our founding documents. We had a professional etiquette seminar. And this was to teach young women to be comfortable in all kinds of situations so they could focus on promoting policy. We take them to a gun range. Some girls shoot, some have never shot. We want them to learn about guns and gun safety. Come to our website, cblwomen.org. Young women can sign up on an email list. You want to support us, there's an opportunity to do that too. And you can certainly buy How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. You can buy it wherever good books are sold. We have interns, we have seminars, we have mentoring lunches. We travel around the country a certain amount. And our goal is to help young women be all that they can be as conservative leaders.
That is awesome. We'll leave it there. She is Michelle Easton, president of the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women, an organization that prepares young women for leadership in policy, civil society, and the family, and author of the new book, How to Raise a Conservative Daughter. Michelle, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you for your time, and have a good.
It's been my pleasure, and God bless you for what you're doing.